Hello and welcome to this podcast. My name is Peter Mazurek and I'm presenting a series of podcasts to review some of the key issues raised in a book that I've written called Modern Catholic Concerns. This is podcast 2 in that series. The subject of this podcast is the 5 ways of Aquinas. These 5 ways are logical proofs of the existence of God. The first issue we need to consider is who was Aquinas. St. Thomas Aquinas was born in 1224 AD and died in 1274 AD. He was a Dominican priest and he worked as a professor of theology in the University of Paris. He was a prolific writer, his best known work being the Summa Theologia. This work contains his 5 ways, which are his proofs of the existence of God. He was canonized by the Catholic Church, and his arguments are based on pure logic, stemming from his knowledge of how the world worked at the time that he lived. We can now consider whether his logic remains valid and whether his knowledge of how the world worked remains a valid argument in the light of modern scientific laws and facts. I've considered the 5 ways of Aquinas in sections 2.1.2 of my book, where I've set out the 5 ways of Aquinas, essentially quoting from what he said, from modern translations of his work. For the purposes of this podcast, I shall attempt to summarize what Aquinas said in modern language. His 5 ways then are as follows. The first way: it is clear to us that some things in the world undergo change, but everything undergoing the process of change is changed by something else. But nothing can change unless it can potentially be what it is being changed into. And nothing can change itself into what it is being changed into. Thus, something external to the thing being changed must be the cause of that change. And the thing that causes the change has been changed into what it is by something else. And that something else has been changed into what it is by something else again, and so on. This, in effect, is a regression of causes of change. But the regression of causes cannot be infinite, because if it were, then there would be no first cause. And without a first cause, there can be no effect of change. Therefore, the first cause has to be God. The logical weakness of this argument is that it is based on some things in the world, which lead us to infer that other things in the world do not undergo change and perhaps have never undergone change, leading to the conclusion that they have always been what they are. If Aquinas had said, all things in the world undergo change, which is probably correct, then his argument would have more substance. But Aquinas did not have the scientific knowledge to say that, and that leaves his argument as logically flawed. In his argument, Aquinas gives the example of fire, which is actually hot, causing wood, which is capable of becoming hot, to actually become hot and burning, and thus becoming burnt wood or ash. This example raises some questions, such as whether spontaneous combustion can be considered to be a cause, and is a difference in temperature of an object a real change in the nature of the object, or is it the real change of actual burning or melting or whatever change the additional heat causes? Accordingly, this example is dubious. The second example is where Aquinas says that if you hit something with a stick, then the stick will not move unless the hand moves the stick. It is difficult to see the regression of causes from this example because a person must move the hand, but a person has a choice to move the stick or not move it, which can break the chain of causation. Again, this example is uncertain and therefore dubious. Essentially, this argument is that there cannot be an infinite regression of causes because without a first cause there cannot be any subsequent effects. This argument is correct as far as it goes, but when applied to the process of change in some things, it is not logically sustainable. The second way, there is an efficient order of causes in the observable world, and we have never observed anything efficiently causing itself, for this would mean that the thing preceded its own existence in order to cause itself to come into existence, which obviously it cannot do. Furthermore, the order of efficient causes cannot go back infinitely, so you cannot have an effect unless it has a preceding cause. And if this goes back infinitely, then there would be no first cause and therefore no last effect. This clearly cannot be the case, therefore the first cause must be God. Essentially, this argument is purely on cause and effect, linked with the proposition of infinite regression. It is the same as the first way, but without the example of heat changing the nature of the object being affected. The argument is logically sound and has been used by the Catholic Church in its dogma relating to proof of the existence of God. The third way, everything that is capable of existing or not existing, because we see things perish and go out of existence. But things that come into existence must have a cause of coming into existence, and that therefore we have to posit that something exists intrinsically which does not owe its existence to anything else. This something is God. In this argument, Aquinas says some of the things we encounter are able to be or not to be, for we find them generated and perished. This argument is logically sound, but based upon the observation that things, such as matter, can both be and not be. This is contradicted by the rules of science that matter cannot be created or destroyed, although we now know that matter can be converted into energy. Aquinas' observation that we see things perish is not scientifically sound. However, the creation of all matter in a Big Bang will be considered later in this podcast. The fourth way, there are different levels of properties in all things. For example, some things are more or less good, more or less true, more or less noble, etc. He goes on to say that there must be something that possesses the most of any of these properties, and that it causes the existence of these properties in other things. For example, fire, the hottest of all things, causes other things to be hot. So the perfection or being that has the fullest amount of all of these properties must be God. This argument raises substantial theological difficulties, and although it is linked to the principle of causation, it is not essentially an infinite regression. Rather, it is a distribution by the thing or entity having the perfect or the fullest quantity of these attributes. This argument is not widely accepted in modern times because it does not rely on infinite regression, and because the logic of the argument that one thing or entity necessarily causes all other things to have more or less of its perfect attributes is logically flawed and not apparently valid. The fifth way, again, is as follows. All of the unintelligent things in the world act in accordance with certain laws, and that these things, lacking in intelligence, act only as directed by one with the knowledge and understanding. For example, arrows need archers. So there is one being with intelligence who directs all natural things to ends, and we call this being God. This argument by Aquinas is not based upon causation or infinite regression, but is rather looking at the level of intelligence found in the operation of the laws of nature. It is not really a logical argument, but rather an argument based upon an observation of the intelligence found in the laws of nature and how ecology works. This argument has been used by the Catholic Church in formulating its dogma in relation to its proof of the existence of God, and will be more fully considered in the next podcast dealing with the teleological argument for the existence of God. The next issue I'd like to review in this podcast is whether we can consider the 5 ways of Aquinas to be relevant in modern times. In this regard, we need to bear in mind that Aquinas wrote his 5 ways nearly 800 years ago, and that in his time he did not have the knowledge of modern cosmology and astronomy. The temperature scales of Fahrenheit or Celsius hadn't been formulated, nor was there a concept of absolute zero, nor had the Big Bang theory been formulated. The most important of these areas of knowledge for the purposes of Aquinas' theories is the Big Bang theory, and we need to consider how the proofs of Aquinas stack up against the Big Bang theory. To consider this, we need to know a little bit more about the Big Bang theory. This theory was originally formulated by a Jesuit priest named George Lemaitre. His hypothesis was that all matter in the universe was compressed into a sphere approximately 30 miles in diameter, which he called a cosmic egg. This sphere exploded and caused the existence of the universe as we know it today. An obvious weakness of this hypothesis is that there is no explanation of where the cosmic egg came from. An astronomer named Fred Hoyle, who believed in the ontological argument for the existence of God, thought that Lemaitre's theory was wrong, and to disparage and ridicule it, he called it the Big Bang theory. So that is where the name comes from, and it has stuck. Since the time of Lemaitre, modern cosmologists, people like Stephen Hawking, have refined the theory so that all matter emerged from a singularity rather than the cosmic egg that Lemaitre had postulated. A singularity is a point in space that has no magnitude, and therefore the Big Bang space was absolutely, so before the Big Bang, space was absolutely empty and infinite. In modern times, the James Webb Space Telescope has observed some celestial objects that appear to be inconsistent with the Big Bang theory. But this doesn't mean that the Big Bang theory is wrong. The hypothesis formulated by Lemaitre and subsequently modified has risen to the status of theory because of the existence of background radiation caused by the Big Bang. This was predicted by the earliest formulations of this hypothesis and has subsequently been verified by many scientists. What we can expect is that the Big Bang theory will be modified to account for these anomalies, and in the meantime the name Big Bang has been retained. The essence of the Big Bang theory is that all the matter that exists in the universe emerged from a singularity and rapidly expanded to form the universe as we know it today, and this occurred about 13.7 billion years ago. What emerged was a gaseous form of stardust, which has since that time coalesced into stars, galaxies, planets, other celestial objects, and all the elements in the periodic table that we know of today. So what would Aquinas say if he were confronted with the Big Bang theory? It seems obvious to me that Aquinas would argue that if the Big Bang theory is correct, then it clearly supports his argument that there cannot be an infinite regression, because before the Big Bang there was simply a void, and that there was no matter existing anywhere in our universe. And since there was no matter in the universe, and it is logically necessary that matter cannot precede itself to create its own existence, there must have been a being in the spiritual realm of existence who caused the Big Bang to occur, and this being we call God. Accordingly, the second and third ways of Aquinas, and to an extent the first way, are supported by the modern Big Bang theory. His second way is purely logical and remains valid. The third way, in some ways, anticipates the Big Bang theory, although there is no time frame involved in Aquinas' formulation. The fourth way, as I have indicated, is not currently popular, and the fifth way is not related to causation and infinite regression, although it has some empirical persuasive value, as it is not based on logic. In summary, the 5 ways of Aquinas are arguments to prove the existence of God. These arguments are mostly based on causation and the illogicality of infinite regression. In this regard, his arguments are valid. Accordingly, it remains legitimate for today's people to rely on Aquinas' second and third ways arguments to support their belief in the existence of God. In the next podcast, I shall deal with the teleological argument as proof for the existence of God. Thank you for your attention.